Verse story. My great-grandfather is 103 years old today. A few days ago, he told me a story that he describes as the most terrifying experience of his entire life. I asked him if it involved Japanese soldiers, since they were known for their ferocity at the time. He told me no, it was something else. I don't know whether this story is true or not, but it gave me chills. He said that nobody had ever believed what happened to him, yet he remembers it as if it were yesterday, and it still haunts him to this day. In 1943, he was stationed in the Philippines with other soldiers fighting against the Japanese. One day, he and his friend Samuel, who passed away decades ago, became separated from their platoon. They were moving through a mountainous province and advancing through a dense forest when they got lost. He no longer remembers the name of the province, but he says it was filled with forests and villages. He and Samuel kept calling out for their comrades as they ventured deeper and deeper into the woods until they finally reached the edge of the forest. I asked him, "Why didn't you simply contact your platoon by radio?" He told me they had tried, but for some unknown reason the communications were distorted and unintelligible. It worried them, but Samuel told him to stay calm and cautious in case they encountered Japanese soldiers. Eventually, they emerged from the forest, but the sun was beginning to set. My great-grandfather told Samuel they needed to set up camp, and Samuel agreed. That was when they noticed a small wooden cabin in the distance. They decided to spend the night there. They knocked on the door and searched the place, but nobody was inside. Clothes were scattered everywhere. They must have fled in a panic, my great-grandfather said. Samuel nodded. They set up camp and ate. Samuel suggested taking turns, standing guard to avoid being caught off guard while they slept. My great-grandfather agreed. While he was asleep, Samuel suddenly shook him awake. I saw something move. My great-grandfather grabbed his rifle. Samuel handed him a pair of binoculars and pointed toward a field about 250 meters away. At first, he couldn't see anything. Then he noticed something moving in the darkness. Looking closer, he realized it was only a wild boar. "It's just a pig," he told Samuel. Samuel took the binoculars to check for himself. "That's strange, it's not moving." My great-grandfather asked what he meant. Samuel replied that the animal was standing completely still, staring at them from the field, and that it was beginning to make him uncomfortable. My great-grandfather laughed and told him his imagination was playing tricks on him. But at that moment, the oil lamp lighting the cabin began to dim. He relit it. A few minutes later, it went out again. He checked it. There was still plenty of oil left. He lit it once more, and once again it went out. Then Samuel, visibly panicked, rushed toward him. "It's gone." "What are you talking about?" "The pig, it vanished." At that point, my great-grandfather started to feel afraid as well. Samuel explained that he had been watching the boar through the binoculars when it suddenly disappeared, as if it had evaporated. Then a heavy thud echoed above them, as though something had landed on the roof. They grabbed their rifles. "We need to get out of here," Samuel said. My great-grandfather told him to stay calm and keep quiet. They stood motionless, weapons in hand. A few moments later, Samuel suddenly screamed. My great-grandfather turned on his lamp and saw a scene straight out of a horror movie. Some kind of tongue was embedded in Samuel's neck. Samuel screamed in agony as he tried to pull it away. My great-grandfather fired several shots into the ceiling. The tongue finally released its grip and slowly retracted into a hole in the roof. Samuel pressed his wound as blood streamed between his fingers. My great-grandfather pressed a cloth against his neck and told him to keep applying pressure. They gathered their belongings and ran outside. My great-grandfather aimed his lamp at the roof. What he saw, he said, was the most evil and hideous thing he had ever seen. I asked him to describe it. It was humanoid, with 2 gigantic wings larger than its body. They looked like a cross between bat wings and hawk wings. Its eyes were red and glowed in the darkness. Its skin was dark, and its enormous fangs protruded even when its mouth was closed. The creature was perched on the roof, watching them. My great-grandfather raised his rifle and emptied his entire magazine into it. Samuel did the same. But the creature didn't react. It simply stared at them, completely unmoved. At that point, they ran like madmen, screaming, willing to face any enemy rather than that thing. Miraculously, the creature did not pursue them. They ran until morning, and eventually reached a small village where they were able to rest. A few days later, they reunited with their platoon. When they told their story, only a handful of men believed them. The others thought they had been drunk or caught in enemy fire, which explained Samuel's neck wound. After the war, they returned home, but my great-grandfather never forgot that encounter, which left him with severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Second story. In 2023, I was participating in a training exercise in the woods of Fort Gregg Adams, Virginia. On the first night, while providing security near the tree line, I spotted the tall, slender silhouette of a man at least 7 feet tall, completely black in appearance. It stood about 50 to 80 meters away, slowly emerging from behind one tree before darting behind another. This went on for a solid 5 minutes before I got a clear look at it. The sun had not even set yet. No matter how many times I blinked or looked away, it was still there. Skeptical, I told myself the shadows of the trees might be playing tricks on me and tried to dismiss the sighting. Yet stranger things happened that night and over the following days. That first night, my squad and I heard a long scream coming from the wooded area where I had seen the figure running. On the second night, my team and I spotted a group of 3 men moving through the woods. When we opened fire, they vanished. One of the evaluators, confused, approached us and asked what we had been shooting at since there were no opposing forces operating in that area. After we explained what we had seen, he told us that during almost every rotation, someone reported seeing a group of 3 men in those same woods, in the exact area where we were conducting our security mission. On the third night, the evaluators were conducting accountability checks at the end of the day when a man who had supposedly been gone for hours shouted from the tree line, "It's me, I'm here." Yet nobody could see him. Needless to say, my team and I kept our sleeping bags very close together that night. Third story. I have a friend who told me a story that he may have completely made up, but it makes for a great ghost story. I'll tell it as best I can, although I probably won't do it justice. He was stationed at a military base somewhere in the Middle East. The base was surrounded by a wall with several guard towers and observation posts, including some near the barracks. There was also a large abandoned warehouse on the base. It was no longer used and had enormous metal doors that opened outward. The doors were always kept shut. Soldiers regularly walked past the warehouse when changing posts. One night, while my friend was in the barracks, gunfire suddenly erupted. Everyone rushed out to see what was happening. The shots were coming from inside the base. When they arrived, they found 2 soldiers in firing positions, their weapons aimed at the warehouse. Both men were completely terrified. One of the warehouse doors was partially open. My friend shouted at them, asking what was going on, but they remained frozen in place. They claimed that a massive black thing had just run into the building. Once they calmed down, they searched the warehouse. Nothing. It took 2 soldiers to close the door again. The following night, screams echoed from inside the warehouse. Another search was conducted. Nothing. On the third night, the same thing happened. More screams. Another group opened fire. Same story. A fast-moving black figure that was impossible to target. The door was once again found partially open. It took 2 men to shut it. Since the incidents kept repeating, and the soldiers involved appeared mentally sound, a more serious investigation was launched. Special cameras were installed facing the entrance. Teams were assigned to monitor the building. Then they waited. One night, The door opened by itself in full view of the cameras. According to the observers, a creature emerged and let out a horrifying scream. The guards immediately opened fire. The thing ran at an inhuman speed before disappearing back inside the warehouse. Then both doors swung completely open. The creature screamed again. Another search followed. Nothing. A special team arrived with additional equipment and heavier weapons. My friend, carrying recording equipment, was part of that team. They opened the massive doors and entered. Inside, the darkness was absolute, but their equipment allowed them to see. They formed a square formation, standing in pairs facing each other. 4 hours passed. Nothing. Then the soldier standing across from my friend motioned toward him. Something was standing behind him. The man to his right looked frozen with fear. The other remained completely still. My friend spun around, raised his weapon, and saw a humanoid creature nearly 10 feet tall. Its eyes were piercing, and its posture was threatening. He opened fire. The creature moved so quickly, it appeared to teleport sideways. It then climbed a wall and crawled onto the ceiling. He fired again, but it was far too fast. It seemed to appear behind each member of the team one after another, constantly placing them in danger. Eventually, the team retrieved their equipment and evacuated. The cameras supposedly recorded everything. My friend was later debriefed and ordered never to speak about the incident. Not long afterward, the warehouse was demolished. According to local villagers, the creature was connected to an old mass grave located near the base. After the events, the grave was reportedly excavated and the bodies were given proper burials. I'm sure I'm forgetting many details. My friend's version was much richer and more convincing. The story was so detailed that you wanted to believe it, yet so unbelievable that it was impossible not to doubt it. Fourth story. For context, I left the United States Marine Corps in January 2026, and this encounter took place around May 2022. Inside Camp Jiger, there is a small training area known as Devil Dog. The final 2 weeks of combat training take place there. I was assigned guard duty from midnight until 2 in the morning, if I remember correctly, and I woke up as usual when my alarm went off. There was a small guard shack there covered with messages and warnings about ghosts, strange voices, and a mysterious woman in white. The sentry I was supposed to relieve was terrified by something she had seen. She claimed she had spotted a woman in a white dress standing motionless in the middle of the road. I made a mistake. I left my pack behind and walked her back to the barracks because she was shaking and looked like she was about to cry. I asked her bunkmate to keep an eye on her. Then I jogged back to the now empty guard post. My pack was gone. It was sitting about 30 meters away in the middle of the road. I assumed a drill instructor was playing a prank on me and resumed my watch. The first 30 minutes were relatively normal until I heard rustling sounds coming from the tree line to the left of the post. Again, I assumed it was an instructor trying to scare me. So I focused on my duties and tried to look busy. The noises continued on and off for 10 to 15 minutes. At that point, I convinced myself it was probably just an animal. I relaxed a little. I still had about an hour left on duty. Then I started hearing what sounded like whispers and muffled laughter. The rest is difficult to explain. I heard a woman's voice repeatedly calling for help. But she was using my first name, not my last name like any Marine would. For nearly an hour, the voice kept calling to me, urging me to follow it and becoming increasingly aggressive over time. I never saw anything, but I know what I heard, and even talking about it still gives me chills. Then I heard what I can only describe as an inhuman scream. It came from roughly a kilometer down the road. Moments later, I heard incredibly fast footsteps circling around me, behind me, in front of me, everywhere at once. Yet I still couldn't see anything. This happened during the final 30 minutes of my watch. At that point, I was gripping my rifle as if my life depended on it, trying to stay hidden from whatever that thing was. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. I was still terrified, sitting there with my weapon, hoping my relief would arrive early. It didn't. Eventually, my replacement arrived. She apologized for being late. I simply replied, "Don't worry about it." Then I practically ran back to the barracks. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Fifth story. There is a roughly 50-kilometer road connecting Barstow, the nearest town, to an isolated military base in the middle of the desert. Along this road stand dozens of crosses erected in memory of soldiers and family members who died in accidents over the years. One evening, a friend from my platoon and I were returning from the shopping mall in Victorville. As we reached the beginning of the road leading to Fort Irwin, I noticed what appeared to be fresh. Blood-stained tire tracks leaving the pavement and heading directly toward one of the memorial crosses. The cross bore a date from August 1989. It was 2006. The sight sent a chill down my spine. At first, I assumed my eyes were playing tricks on me. 20 minutes later, we were still driving along that lonely two-lane road through the dark desert. I was watching my friend drive while he hummed along to the radio. Then, as we sped along at about 120 km/h, 75 mph, something crossed the road directly in front of us. I only caught a glimpse of it. A gigantic humanoid creature covered in hair. As it crossed the road, it turned and looked directly at us. The thing was enormous, at least 2 meters tall, but it was its eyes that stayed with me. Even now, I don't know how to describe them. For the brief instant that it turned its head toward us, time seemed to slow down. Its eyes looked like white voids. Not reflections. Not light. More like an absence of light. A dead, empty void. It was the most terrifying sensation I have ever experienced. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. It was conscious, but not in the way we are. I turned toward my friend. He was screaming. The creature crossed the road and disappeared into the desert. My friend thought we had nearly hit a person. We pulled over and got out of the vehicle. But there was nothing there. Only the dark desert surrounding us. What was that? A bear? No. Then what was it? We still had 20 minutes to drive before reaching the base. The rest of the trip was spent in complete silence, with the music turned off. My friend, who was usually extremely talkative, barely said a word. And I couldn't think of anything to say either. When we got back to the base, we told our squad what had happened. Nobody believed us. A few weeks later, however, I started hearing rumors. Some people claimed they had seen exactly the same thing. Years after leaving the military, I did some research. I came across several Native American legends claiming that Sasquatch inhabits the desert expanses and salt flats of the region. I found a surprising amount of information about it. Whatever we saw that night, my friend turned as white as a ghost. And neither of us ever spoke about it again. Sixth story. My father was quite a character, larger than life. He was a massive man, cheerful, outgoing, and incredibly talkative, with an overwhelming presence. Until something seemed to switch inside him, and suddenly, he would become angry and dangerous. He married my mother when I was 6 years old, and I grew up knowing both sides of his personality very well. For years, those seemed to be the only two versions of him that existed. Then one day, when I was in my 20s, he told me a story. For the first time in my life, I saw him uncertain, thoughtful, and deeply disturbed by something he couldn't explain. Determined to escape the limitations of his small Minnesota hometown, he lied about his age and enlisted in the military at just 17 years old in 1938. Soon afterward, he was assigned to intelligence duties and sent to China following Japan's invasion of Shanghai, where his mission was to gather information about the escalating violence in the region. After Pearl Harbor, he spent the first 2 years of the war serving as a paratrooper in the South Pacific until he was seriously wounded and sent back to the United States for treatment. After several months of recovery, he was considered healthy enough to return to service, but not healthy enough to return directly to combat. As a result, he was assigned to an airborne division in North Carolina, where he helped develop training programs for paratroopers. It was there that he and several of his fellow soldiers began developing new reconnaissance methods for operations behind enemy lines. That brings me to the story he told me. During the Korean War, long after returning to intelligence work, he became part of an elite group tasked with parachuting behind enemy lines, gathering information, and bringing it back to friendly forces. Because troop movements constantly shifted the front lines, return routes changed all the time. Many men lost their lives trying to make it back. During one particularly important mission, my father was carrying critical intelligence. He had completed roughly half of the journey when a violent storm broke out late in the afternoon, forcing him to seek shelter. He remembered seeing a cave earlier along his route and decided to backtrack to it. Once inside, he did what any exhausted soldier would do. He found a corner and fell asleep. Some time later, someone shook him awake. It was another member of his team, a close friend whom I'll call Buddy because I no longer remember his real name. The storm was still raging outside. Buddy explained that he had taken a tremendous risk to reach him. According to him, the route my father had been following had been compromised closer to the front lines. Using the dim light of a lamp, Buddy drew a map in the dirt showing a new path from the cave to friendly territory. Then he slapped him on the back. "Get home alive, you poor bastard." He added that he still had something to do before disappearing back into the storm. My father estimated that the entire visit lasted no more than 5 minutes. At the time, nothing about it seemed unusual. Using the new route, he reached friendly lines without incident after about 2 days of travel. After delivering the intelligence, he ate a meal and collapsed into his tent to rest. The next morning, after washing up and recovering, he joined several of his comrades for breakfast. They greeted him warmly and seemed genuinely relieved to see him alive. Their reaction surprised him. "You won't get rid of me that easily," he joked. They talked for a few minutes before my father asked a simple question. "By the way, when did Buddy get back?" The men exchanged strange looks. Finally, one of them replied, "He never came back." My father frowned. "What do you mean? Did he already head out again?" Now they looked just as confused as he was. "No," one of them said. "Buddy never returned from his last mission." At that moment, my father told me he started getting angry. "That's impossible." He explained that he had seen Buddy in the cave, spoken with him, and even received a new route from him. The others remained silent. Then one of them calmly asked, "What new route?" My father replied, "The Southern Pass, the one Buddy came to show me." The man's face went pale. "That's impossible." Then he added, "Buddy was killed several days ago while returning from his last mission. One of our scouts saw him go down. The North Koreans searched his body and recovered the documents he was carrying, including the maps showing our return routes. We thought you were dead." My father was speechless. That's the story he told me. When he finished, he looked at me with a dark smile. "Buddy was there in that cave. As real as you are right now. When he came to see me, he'd already been dead for at least a day, and if he hadn't warned me, I would have died too." He paused. "Sometimes I wonder if I dreamed the whole thing, but the facts are the facts. I came back using a route I'd never heard of before that night in the cave." Seventh story. As a Marine, I was often assigned night duty near a memorial dedicated to an attack. Part of the site also included an old military cemetery. Strangely, I was never afraid of being alone at night in that isolated cemetery, surrounded by thick forest. On the contrary, the place felt strangely peaceful. However, one night, while I was patrolling near the outer fence where the oldest graves were located, I heard a woman humming. I followed the sound. Then I noticed a light shining through the brush around a large tree. As I got closer, I felt my hair stand on end, as if the air itself was charged with electricity. I pushed aside the branches, and what I saw almost took my breath away. There was an old gravestone with a large cross engraved into the marble. The cross was glowing a vivid blue, almost fluorescent, like neon light. The humming suddenly became much louder. It sounded like it was coming from hundreds of voices at once. I completely freaked out. I screamed and ran back to the parking area. I immediately called the guard, who was supposed to relieve me, and made him come earlier. I spent the rest of my shift sitting inside his truck. I don't think he really believed me, but he also stayed inside his vehicle until sunrise. A few days later, I decided to go back to the site during the daytime. As expected, the grave looked completely ordinary. No name, no inscription, just the same cross carved into the stone. I examined it closely. I ran my hands over the marble, checking for any hidden light source or solar panel. Nothing. It was just an ordinary gravestone. The humming was gone too. I eventually resumed my normal patrols and never experienced anything strange there again. I never found out who the grave belonged to, but I still think about it sometimes. It sounds absurd when I say it out loud. Maybe it was an hallucination, or just my exhausted mind playing tricks on me. But I don't really believe that. I think what I saw was real. A ghost, a spirit, or something similar. Whatever it was, I don't think it meant any harm.